As we've been hearing, the list of Henry Kissinger's achievements, first as National Security Advisor and then as Secretary of State, are impressive. But how does Dr. Kissinger himself reflect on events such as President Nixon's historic visit to China? Susan Yu met the former diplomat recently in New York and asked him where China would be today if it hadn't opened up to the rest of the world.
I think if one looks at it in retrospect, some opening to China would have happened because the Chinese were very determined to get it. The contribution that President Nixon and perhaps I made is that we understood, we were the Chinese psychology somewhat better, and we were willing to talk about fundamental issues, and I think we speeded up the process of normalization.
Do you have any regrets about the Shanghai Communique? Has the U.S. sold Taiwan out?
First of all, Taiwan, since the Shanghai Communique, has prospered enormously and has achieved a substantial international identity. And I would argue that without the Shanghai Communique, Taiwan would be in a much worse position. And people shouldn't talk about it having sold out Taiwan. Without America, Taiwan would not be where it is, and this has been carried out by every administration, including ours.
What do you think is the biggest threat to security in Asia? Is it China's military expansionism, or is it the nuclear race in South Asia?
I don't accept the proposition of Chinese military expansionism. I haven't seen any evidence of Chinese military expansionism. And I have confidence in the good sense of the Chinese, because when they look around their periphery, they see no easy target for military expansionism. There is the special problem of Taiwan, and that is an issue of principle for both sides. But I do not foresee in the next 10 years Chinese armies marching around Southeast Asia.
Dr. Kissinger, you've been invited to be a so-called advisor to President Wahid. What is your objective?
My objective?
What is your objective? What do you think you can bring to him?
I didn't volunteer for that job. First of all, it's not a job. It's an unpaid honorary position. And I didn't know President Wahid when he appointed me to that position. I'm honored to be asked. I have no objective. My objective is a independent Indonesia that is standing on its own feet, that is developing, and that responds to its population's desires. And I will do my best to help them. But I have no independent agenda for Indonesia.
Your detractors say that your position as a so-called volunteer advisor has been compromised with your shares or your interest in the Freeport Mining Group. What is your response to that?
Well, first of all, I didn't volunteer. Secondly, I don't go around the world answering every criticism that is being made. President Wahid knew that I'm on the board of directors of Freeport. Freeport is the biggest taxpayer in Indonesia, and any sensible person must recognize that for Freeport to do well, Indonesia has to do well, and therefore there are no conflicting interests. But if anyone thinks there are conflicting interests, I did not volunteer my advice.
Looking at East Timor, the situation in East Timor, do you have any regrets as to America's role in so-called giving the green light to President Suharto?
Do you think we could conduct this interview without constant demands for apologies from the United States? No, I have no regrets. We had 100 other things at that moment. East Timor was like Goa, and in our thinking. We knew next to nothing about it. And for us to maintain the position that East Timor should remain Portuguese, which was the alternative that appeared at the time, was absurd. Afterwards, Indonesia engaged in a number of brutal acts that it shouldn't have, but it was not anything that the United States, for ending a colonial outpost in the Indonesian archipelago at a time when we had enormous problems around the world, is not something that I regret. And I won't answer any more questions about do I regret this or that, so you have to ask me other questions.
I just wanted to get your response to criticisms that
I don't
people have
care.
made.
I have survived criticisms for a long time.
What was your first thought when President Clinton visited Vietnam? Was there a feeling that things have come full circle for America?
I was in favor of normalizing relations with Vietnam. I believe that America, as I have said before, entered the war for noble motives. It was not done in the administration in which I served. Our administration ended the war. So we inherited the war. So I'm justifying decisions in which I was not even remotely involved. I think normalizing relations with Vietnam is good. I sort of resent their bringing out bodies every time a distinguished American visits. They produce a body that they should have produced in 1973. And I don't feel the ecstasy that President Clinton obviously felt in being in Vietnam, but I think it's an appropriate thing to do.
What is the motivation for you writing your memoirs? Was it an opportunity to set the record straight on lots of issues?
You just won't quit. I don't feel guilty. I don't have to set the record straight. I wrote my memoirs because I started out as a historian. In the 19th century, the bureaucracies were much smaller, and policymakers had to explain themselves to each other in order to persuade each other, because distances were so great that they couldn't communicate quickly. In the modern period, the bureaucracies are huge, and the amount of documentation is so great that no outside historian can possibly find his way through it. So those of us who were in a high office, who have a historical interest, almost have an obligation to leave a record of what they thought was significant.
Dr. Kissinger, you've been credited with, number one, opening China, number two, détente with the Soviet Union, number three, getting the Israelis and the Arab neighbors to agree to certain things. You've won the Nobel Peace Prize. What is your biggest accomplishment out of all these? Can you tell us?
Well, it's difficult to rate them. I think the peace process in the Middle East, opening to China, ending the Vietnam War, these were all objectively equally important issues. At the time, ending the Vietnam was the most emotional thing, but so many events happened after that it has lost some of its significance.
What do you think your legacy will be? Or what do you hope it to be?
My legacy is now beyond me to influence, and it's not for me to say what it is and isn't. And when I was in government, I was not thinking in terms of what my legacy would be, but I was thinking in terms of the issues that I had to address. And like any high official, I was hoping to leave the world and my country a somewhat better place than I found it. But whether I succeeded or not is not for me to judge. That's for others to judge.
Henry Kissinger was talking to Susan Yu.